Markets in Türkiye slumped as we saw the nation appear to be heading for a runoff election. The benchmark stock index fell as much as 6.7%, triggering a circuit breaker before pairing losses on the day. Now, Turkey's dollar bonds were amongst the biggest losers in emerging markets, and the cost of protecting the debt against default also jumped as well. We saw the Turkish Lira currency sliding 0.4% against the dollar today. State lenders intervened to limit those losses, according to people who are familiar with the matter. Investors closely watching the elections to determine whether to plow money back into that $900 billion economy are now losing confidence following, of course, Sunday's outcome of that election. Well, let's now get some insight into this. Of course, as we mentioned, we saw markets slumping on the news of that runoff. Well, joining us with some more insight into the impact on markets today is Taha Arvas, the Vice Chairman at the Capital Markets Board of Turkey. Very great to have you with us on the show today, sir. And I'd just like to start off with the fact that today saw stocks and bonds in the country pretty much crashing to lows on the news of that runoff. Give us a sense of the impact or the extent of the impact we saw across markets today.
First of all, Turkish markets are relatively more volatile than much larger, deeper markets. So while 6% drop is significant, it's not as large as it would be for other markets. And notably, the reason for this drop is because of this uncertainty we're talking about. But when we factor in what happened in the currency markets, which we're talking about a 6.5% appreciation of the Turkish lira versus the dollar in the unofficial currency markets, we see that investors are betting that we will have a quick resolution in the upcoming runoff in 2 weeks. And just as your correspondent, Mikhail Bardavit, said a few minutes ago, that the Turkish president, Erdogan, is only off by 0.5%, whereas the third-party candidate got 5.5%. So he only needs to get 10% of the remaining votes to win, and that seems to be what markets are pricing in now.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's sort of fueling this investor sentiment right now, because the news of that runoff seemed to come as a surprise for investors. Many of them seem to be betting on an end to the incumbent President Erdogan's two-decade rule in the country. Give us a sense of what your thoughts are on investor sentiments right now. What is fueling this bearish trend that we're seeing?
Right. So this is a trend. Listen, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Federal Reserve, has raised interest rates 8 times back to back. You get a great return on your U.S. dollar returns. So there is generally a flight to quality, so-called flight to quality. So emerging markets in general are seeing sell-offs across the board, and people are rushing into dollar-denominated assets in general. But we just had this major banking crisis as well in the United States. Switzerland's second largest bank went bankrupt a few weeks ago. So there is global chaos as far as financial markets go. Türkiye is just the latest in a line of countries that are experiencing some withdrawals from markets. But having said that, like I said, it appears that the president is almost guaranteed to win here in 2 weeks' time. With that, we should see consistent investment in Turkish stocks, and countries and companies like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is the largest investor in the Turkish stock market, and these are $1 trillion wealth funds that have so much money, and they believe in the future of Türkiye. So it appears that those who have a long-term perspective are in Türkiye for the long term.
And I'm curious to know whether you share that sentiment for the currency, the lira, because as you mentioned, we saw it fall 0.4% against the dollar today. There are also reports that state banks had to intervene in order to limit those losses. So what is your outlook on the lira?
So yeah, the lira is currently in a managed float, and as a result, there are two aspects to what will happen with the lira in the future. A few days ago, one of the fourth party candidate withdrew, and as a result, many people thought the opposition would handily win this election. People were projecting 60% versus much less for the government. And at that point, the Turkish lira actually depreciated wildly against the US dollar, but only after we've seen that that's not happened. In unofficial markets, the Turkish lira actually appreciated against the US dollar today. So that may be a harbinger of what's to come. We'll know in a few weeks' time, actually, barring a surprise win by the opposition. It looks like the Turkish government will come back. But more importantly, it's what the Federal Reserve will do. It's what inflation globally, the European inflation specifically, American inflation in general, inflation in China, Japan, all these major developed countries and their battle with inflation is what will change Turkey's currency and its ability to stave off further depreciation.
Well, I'd like to ask you, what candidate do you think has seemingly inspired investor confidence going forward? I know you said there are other factors to consider, but what candidate's economic plan has inspired investor confidence? We know the opposition, they said they're going to reverse many of the current administration's economic policies. Are investors happy with that? What are your thoughts?
So it's the greater question is, do I believe a politician can materially affect the long-term prospects of a country and its economic prospects? I don't, frankly. I think markets are way too mature, way too big, way too deep for any one politician to impact things. Just as Joe Biden can't materially impact the dynamics of U.S. markets, so too can't President Erdogan. Obviously, he has a plan to. He ran on this plan despite being, frankly, in this major economic downturn. He won despite that, and it's the reasoning is because people didn't believe that the opposition could do better. Right now, the Turkish government isn't saying that things are great in Turkey or that things are going to be great immediately. They're saying we are in a global post-pandemic recession. And if you listen to what's coming in the news out of Washington, you know that U.S. policymakers are warning of 10 million American families going unemployed in the next 6 months here. They're actually aiming for unemployment to drive inflation down. So in this environment, Turkey is relatively performing well. Will we head to a great recession in the next 6 months to a year? Will the global economy go in a downturn? Perhaps, in which case it'll be difficult for the Turkish government to do well, but I guess they'll do their best, just as all other countries are trying to do their best.
Quite right. Well, we do have to leave it there, Mr. Arvas, but thank you so much for those great insights. That, of course, was Mr. Taha Arvas, Vice Chairman at the Capital Markets Board of Türkiye.